Hello, I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and welcome to Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. Today we're talking about doctors, superpowers, and you, with Dr. Tom Benzoni. The pandemic has shown us the importance of doctors in our lives. We depend on them, and the result of their work can look like a miracle. They see us at our best and at our worst. Now, should we trust their advice like we trust their care? We've all learned a lot in the past year. We're going to talk about what doctors have learned and how it may impact your life. Dr. Benzoni is here to help us explore some of the most important topics and ideas that have direct relevance to your life today. Hello, Tom. Welcome to the show.
Hey, good to see y'all.
Well, we had a conversation not too long ago, and you just filled my head with all sorts of things about what we've learned.
Well, just do what I do. Go like that and it'll all fall out.
Yeah. Well, let's start putting some out there.
All right.
What do you see as the primary difference in the relationship between doctors and patients today as before the pandemic?
I'm going to speak first of a duality because it's two different frames of reference. When I'm at work, unchanged, because in that relationship, the patient ends up being very dependent upon my opinion and all that. Can you say crap on your show?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because all that crap that's out there in the world, there's a saying that's really relevant to it. There are no atheists in the foxholes. So that's on the one side. On the other side, if you want me to delete your email, just put something from social media in it. And it's bink. That's what the delete key is for. Because I look at all of that and studying it. And Peter, I may be picking on your industry too, pretty bad here. But all the crap that's spread around. Well, to me, there's two classifications of people. So now we're out of the professional environment. We're out of when there's a physician-patient dependency relationship. That's one area. And sorry about the hands. If I said I'm Italian, if I sit in my hands, I can't talk. On the other hand, there is the external stuff that takes place in the world. That's social media, all that kind of thing. There, I look at that and ER docs think in binary. So I see two classifications of people. I see perpetrators and I see sheeple, SHEEPLE. There are the perpetrators are the people who knowingly spread false information, and they're pretty easy to pick out because what you do is take a look and say, are they monetizing it? If they're monetizing it, then what they're dependent upon is the sheeple, the sheep that just follow them along, click the keys, click the forwards, click the buttons that puts money in their pot.
So we know that the pharmaceutical industry followed the lure of money, and we had the opioid epidemic. I mean, we've seen that influence. And we've even seen doctors fooled years ago by fake research that was perpetrated by the pharmaceutical companies. Now, it seems as if this climate has brought people closer together, their doctors, where they're willing to bring in what they're hearing in social media, on TV, and get your opinion. Now, is that true, or is that just something I hope to believe?
Well, but once they get into the exam room, they're there for me as an ER doc. Now, I don't deal with the things that the family practice docs, et cetera, have to deal with. Okay, so there's two different relationships. Once again, playing with the binary issue, two different relationships there. My relationships with the patients that I see are generally involuntary. They would rather be about anywhere else but in my shop. Okay. Whereas the family medicine docs have an ongoing, a horizontal rather than a vertical relationship. Their ongoing relationship with their patients, there, the interpersonal relationship is much more important. So in my shop, people don't tend to bring in all the social media, et cetera, for an opinion, as they may with the family practice doc. Instead, when they come in the ER, they have a problem that they need addressed. And as far as they're concerned, one ER doc is as good as another. Doesn't make any difference because they really don't get a choice.
So other than COVID admissions, what has changed in the ER room since COVID?
Well, the problem is I'm making these nice, clean lines between the two. They don't exist. They bleed over. So back a year, 18 months ago, in fact, I remember going into work. I never got my COVID lockdown. All this COVID lockdown stuff, clean out your house, the whatever the thing is where you clean out your closets. My closets still are full of garbage and stuff I need to get cleaned up. But I remember seeing people treating each other nicely, being courteous. I even watched the drivers in Des Moines change the way that they treat each other, letting people in. When you turn on the turn signal, somebody would back off and let you in. It was an amazing thing. I thought, wow, wonder if this can continue. And of course, then somebody figured out how to monetize it by getting people to fight, and it didn't continue because you don't make any money if people get along. You only make money if people fight. The munitions industry has known about that for a long time. And a very famous general, when he retired as president, warned us about that. Dwight D. Eisenhower.
What did Dwight say?
Beware the industrial complex, being aware of the industrial complex. So here, being aware of the medical industrial complex. But he told people to be careful of the government, the munition industry getting together to create wars to sell stuff.
That's an excellent point. And let's bring that down to the level of somebody that's going to the doctor. We'll take a short break, and we come back. We'll continue our conversation with Dr. Tom Benzoni. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this.
The black truck? Hey, Christina from accounting.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, I used to date a girl named Christina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then she dumped me for my best friend. You want to see some photos of them that I took?
I don't.
I thought we talked about this, buddy.
Buzzed and overshared again?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna call a car.
That's a smart idea.
So yeah, I know, that's why I did it.
Hey, you're gonna get back to the top of the mountain.
Does that mean I'm gonna get back with Christina?
No.
Oh.
No.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and we're talking with Dr. Tom Benzoni about some issues and ideas that have emerged over the last year, not the least of which is the impact of medical and doctors' messages in our daily lives. Tom, there's been just a lot of things that you have an opinion on that come out. What are some of the big things that you're like starting to champion or complain about, whichever way it is?
I get lots of opinions, and frankly, and I'll put right here as a disclaimer, this is just all my opinion. It has nothing to do with the people with whom I work, for whom I work, the institutions for whom I work. I certainly don't speak as a spokesman for them, as you can clearly see, because they tend to get worried about that. Part of this is also just an old guy's view of looking back and having seen decades of good leadership and failed leadership, and just seeing how these things develop. When you lead from in front. You don't lead from behind. So when I look around me now at expert leadership, one of the things that makes me sad, not sad, but just kind of saying, how did we get here? When I look at so much leadership, I see leadership leading from the middle. Let's get in the middle. Well, that's just statistically. If you just play with statistics for a minute, when statistics bore the hell out of everybody. But if you lead from the middle, by definition, you eventually have to be in the middle. I mean, it's such a simple idea. But when I watch leadership all be afraid to stand up and say what, well, if they don't know, there's another set of problems. But I have a really hard time. I think, I forget whose razor it is, Hanlon's razor. Don't ever ascribe to malice where stupidity will suffice. I hope that it's just ignorance of their industry and not something more nefarious. Where I see leadership in my own industry, healthcare, instead of standing up and saying the things that need to be said to demonstrate to the people that they're throwing into the trenches, use the warfare thing, instead of saying, listen, general public, this is the way it is. This is the way my industry works. These are the medications. These are what these doctors and nurses are doing for you. If you don't like it, go someplace else because I don't need your business. Imagine if a healthcare leader would stand up and say that. What their troops, the people following them, use the standard model, what the troops following them think, they would think, boy, you know, that works a whole lot better than people holding up signs saying healthcare heroes. But I don't see that anymore. And maybe it comes from being of the Vietnam generation.
You know, you sent me an article that showed almost 20 different major diseases and things that vaccines have helped stop and save. Mm-hmm. I mean, without them, God knows what would be left of humanity. And yet we now have a good portion of Americans that have recently stigmatized getting a vaccine, but from that middle of politics. Not from the science, not from the doctors. There aren't doctors saying don't get a vaccine for the most part. How do we explain this kind of thinking? Can we get over that hurdle, or is this just a part of like the ignorance of culture that's going to keep moving on?
I'm going to speculate to a conclusion for a minute. You can backtrack from it as you so desire. I actually, although I tend to sound like I'm not very, I actually kind of an optimistic guy. I look at this stuff going forward, and you know, there's a very famous guy, George Carlin. You probably don't remember him. He was before your time. I know George. Yeah, pull up George Carlin's piece on climate change. It's really interesting and really true. The Earth is fine. It's people that are screwed. You know, if you don't figure this out, it's us. The planet's fine. The planet will go on. Let's get rid of us. It'll shake us off like a bad case of fleas. It's a great piece. It's worth watching. I look at that and go, you know, I tend to be more toward the optimistic side of people. Seeing the thing we had when we went through all the smog of the 70s and all that, we eventually figured that out. The solution, I think, to our medical issues is not going to be medical people. Medical people, we talk in these 6-syllable words that nobody can understand, and doctors love to disagree with each other publicly and pontificate and all that stuff. To me, the solution is going to be the general public figuring out AI algorithm. You mean what they're doing is making me a stupid? They're sitting there, they figured out that if I keep, whoa, dude, ain't nobody taking advantage of me. Delete my account. I'm out of here. People gradually figuring that piece out. The other piece that I think is going to be really interesting is this, and I'll be sitting in a rocking chair in a nursing home probably when I'm reading this history, is I think eventually the legal profession will come back around. The medical profession, legal profession, supposedly people think we fight with each other, and you know, that's fun. But the learned profession of the law, I think, is going to end up being a solution here. Pardon me. I think that two things will happen. One of them is that the people who've monetized disinformation are going to be exposed. You can't get away with telling lies forever. Eventually, the truth comes home to roost. Eventually, you're outed. So I think when those people are held responsible for what they told the sheeple, when the sheeple find out, hey, that anti-vax dude, he went and got vaxxed and then told me not to get vaxxed. The dude was lying to me. People are going to be really pissed when they find out how they were treated. And then the legal profession is going to figure out, like they're doing right now with the opioid thing. The opioid thing was I saw it emerge in the late 80s and early 90s. Just now we're coming to the reckoning. Eventually, the legal profession will figure out, how do we take the money away from the liars who knowingly spread not misinformation.
Excellent points. We're going to take a short break, and afterwards we're going to dive into the impact of the pandemic on drug use, substance use disorder, and maybe some other emerging risks a little closer to home. See y'all after the break. You don't want to miss this.
Today, more than ever, you need fast, reliable internet. At Mediacom, we want you to know you can count on us. Our fiber-powered 100% gigabit technology network was built for the future. We have enormous capacity and power, and 99.99% network reliability. So even though these are uncertain times, we're prepared. And you can be certain we'll keep your world connected.
Multiple studies have shown that marijuana can slow both driver reaction and response time, which can be really dangerous. He's here. He's here.
Wait.
Why?
I can't drive.
Why? My. Oh.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're talking with Dr. Tom Benzoni about important shifts in thinking and outcomes in this era of the pandemic and the influence of the pandemic on things like drug abuse. And sometimes it's a good thing to look at the numbers, and some of them are frightening. One for me is the fact that they've just announced that more people have already died in 2021 from the pandemic than died in 2020, and yet we're trying to act like this is something that's over. And in the opioid epidemic, we're talking about all these great things we're accomplishing, yet we just eclipsed 100,000 deaths in the last 12 months, which is the most ever from opioid-related overdose deaths. The numbers aren't adding up to what we want to believe about the world getting better. Tom, what insights can you share on that?
I have no novel insights. Instead, I'm going to quote a great figure from history. You ever hear of a fellow named Joseph Stalin? This is credited to him. I don't really know that he's had. I haven't cross-verified it. The death of one is a tragedy. The death of a million is a statistic. That's where we've come.
What's changed in like with the pandemic? What's changed? We thought that all the people that were vulnerable died last year, and now more people are dying.
Well, we did last year is we kicked off grandma. We kicked grandma to the curb last year. So if you look at the death curves for the 2020 pandemic, it's the elderly. We didn't have vaccinations. They were dying in nursing homes and all that. That was a population that I was seeing at work. What's happened now that you've got that population immunized, yes, and we can discuss the immunizations and why people are just weird about understanding those. But that's once again misinformation. The population now that is being affected are 30, 40, 50-year-olds. And what happens though, there's a phenomenon, Peter, that we've induced in this with the way that we treat people when they come into the healthcare system. That's very problematic. And part of this is a leadership question of not telling the stories of the people who come in. When someone comes in with COVID, the first thing we do is bundle them up, put them away, we put them somewhere, and they're hidden. They're hidden from view. Their suffering isn't public. It's not a public execution of hanging on the cross. These people are put into a little area. Maybe the family can Zoom time with them as they die. That's wrong. Okay, I get it that public health is right. It's the right thing to do. I get it that medically it's the right thing to do. But I'll tell you, for getting people to understand a pandemic, it's the wrong thing to do. What you need to do is take that. One of the last guys I treated was very healthy. He looked he was cut like a sergeant in the army. Just even had the haircut. It was just a really good looking. Could have been on GQ magazine. Maybe 10 years too old for GQ. But anyway, he needed to be put outside on the sidewalk, sell tickets like Barnum and Bailey used to do, and say, watch this man die as he dies from COVID. Look at him turn colors. Look at him suffer. Then the public would begin to understand it. I know you can't do that. I know ethically there's a huge problem with that, and I'm not going to do that, but these stories are not being told except a few brave institutions. Ames, Mary Greeley Hospital recently did a series on how people look when they come into the ICU. That will give people an idea of what we're dealing with. Back in the days of polio, March of Dimes, who was the kid who became the face of March of Dimes, the face of polio? People could see these things. Now what happens, somebody gets sick, they come to see me, and then we put them in a little package, and they maybe eventually go home to their family, debilitated, can't breathe, got long COVID, or they go home to the family in a box.
So it's going to be a long, cold winter because the numbers are just not going down.
Not going down my foot. They're ramping back up.
Wow.
But that's what you expect. That's what the virus does. It does this. There's nothing special about the virus. This virus is just doing what viruses do. It's the people. That's why I quoted George Carlin earlier. It's the people that are the problem. It's the people behavior, not the virus. The virus just does what the virus does. The virus is like the planet. It's just there.
Well, let's shift gears now to the opioid epidemic. Those numbers are rising, and we seem to be throwing all kinds of money and programs at this, and it's not doing anything. Okay, what's the Tom Benzoni spin on that?
Well, we're actually seeing two things. And as with any time you're dealing with drug abuse, it's a pisser of a disorder. What we're seeing now, at least in this area and many other areas of the country, is the combination of uppers and downers. Speedball was the old term for it. Basically, it's the same thing as vodka and Red Bull, the wide awake drunk thing that was very popular. Now I'm probably dating myself. How long ago was that? But now what we're seeing is meth combined with opioids, meth and fentanyl. So basically, it keeps you awake to enjoy the high. I don't think that concept makes any sense. By taking the two together, so people say, well, the people that die, people that die of it don't say anything. The people that take meth and uppers and downers together, meth and fentanyl together, are staying awake, but enjoying the warm blue feelings of the opioids, but staying awake for it instead of going to sleep.
Let's take a short break. I want to get into this a little bit more in the final segment where you can give some advice on some of these things. I think it's important here. After a short break, Tom will come back and share some final comments, insights, and advice. You don't want to miss this. Stay tuned.
Every second, 127 new devices connect to the internet. You can feel it happening. Our digital world expanding with every breath. We're entering a whole new era of connectivity, and MediaCom will be ready to power it with one of the nation's first 10G platforms. We'll be bringing you more speed, more capacity, more security, and the power to do more than you ever dreamed possible.
Whether it's advice on managing your anxiety or tools to help you stay grounded, Coping-19 provides a range of resources and self-care tips to help you cope with this pandemic. We can help. Find the resources that work best for you at coping-19.org.
Welcome back. Today on Surviving Bad, we're talking about the changing role of doctors in our lives, the importance of listening to them, and also about some really dangerous emerging trends. Let's hear what advice Dr. Benzoni has to share with us, and specifically on the issue of this problem with the opioid epidemic and now a rising meth use curve. And there's some relationship between these two. Tom, tell us about it.
I'll tell you the conclusion first, Peter. I'm getting soul weary of this, SOUL, weary of people being damaged by narcotics, by drugs. There's been a shift in the last, I'm going to say 5 years or so. I don't really have a solid number on this, where I'm seeing meth and opioids, meth and fentanyl, to be specific, mixed together. And it's an interesting problem, because when someone goes to buy meth and has some fentanyl mixed with it and they're not charged any extra, that's a value-added proposition to the user, because this is the way that the users would tend to think. So wonderful, going to go back for more. The problem is that the amounts in there are not regulated. So if the person is not accustomed to it, a little lower meth, a little higher fentanyl, and they bring them in with a tag on their toe. or if they've been off for a while, if they've tried to get clean for a little bit. The most famous example, Graham Parsons. Remember Graham Parsons from back a while ago? That's what happened to him. He got clean for a while and then took a hit of heroin, and it killed him. When they are clean for a little bit, they become more sensitive again, and that, of course, improves the high, but it also markedly increases the death rate. So people who get into treatment have a special vulnerability if they get back in contact with drugs.
Yeah, we've seen this trend. I mean, years ago when I was in college, it was you drank so much you were just about getting the spins, and then you did a line of cocaine, and boy, you could drink more. But when the cocaine wore off, the ambulances were called because alcohol poisoning became acute immediately. I mean, it wasn't a gradual process. Now, I know you had mentioned that the idea of becoming really sick from drinking is the way of sometimes the body to communicate, saying it's time for you to slow down. Why don't you listen to the body? But drugs like fentanyl and meth can take away can just jump right over all of the body's signals pretty quickly, can't they?
Well, the tremendous dopamine release that occurs with both of them, different mechanisms, but huge reward that is produced in the brain. Heard an addict once describe how he became addicted, and the quote that has really stuck with me when he took his first hit of an opioid. He said, "For the first time, I loved myself." That warm feeling that he got. Then he talked about how eventually over the next month to 6 months, he had to take it just to feel halfway normal. And then after that, he had to take it so he didn't hate himself. So this is when I instruct the residents and the nurses, when you give somebody a hit of Narcan, you might have saved their life, but you are no hero to them. Because when they wake up, they hate themselves. And this is what abusers do. Abusers hate themselves. They take it out on their victims. They then see you as the arch Satan because, I mean, they're not dead and they're no longer high and you caused it.
You know, that's a tremendously powerful message on which we will end today's interview. Tom, thank you so very much for taking us across this sort of very fascinating landscape that you experience as a doctor and that you perceive as a doctor with your unique view of people. And thank you all for joining us today. Check out our website at healthyiowa.org for more information, and keep your eye on MediaCom MC22 for our next episode of Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. On MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.